Did you know that there are 4 different ways to crochet 3 double crochets together? And each of these different ways gives you the same result as far as numbers of stitches go. So if you are following a pattern, you can use any of these 4 and the stitch count is not affected. Let's first look at these 4 and then afterwards I'll talk a bit about how you decide which one to use. Here I have a piece with double crochets, and first I do the most common way, and then at the end of this same row my favorite way. So the most common way that most likely you are very familiar with. You start 3 double crochets and leave the last stage undone with each of them, and after you have 4 loops on the hook, you take a yarn over and pull through all of them. I'll crochet a couple of stitches after it so we see how it sort of settles here. And as we can see, it is quite bulky done like that there, and easily bulges outwards too. And that is the reason why I mainly prefer using the other way. I'll make a few stitches in between here, and then we'll look at the second way. We start exactly the same way, 1 double crochet that we don't finish, but then instead of starting another one using a yarn over and so on, we go straight into the next stitch and pull up a loop. So now we are in 2 stitches, and the same for the next one. So now again we have 4 loops on the hook, and we take a yarn over and pull through all of them. But that makes a much smaller stitch. I'll crochet a few stitches so we see how that settles in there. This splits like that there. It makes a sort of a smaller stitch, and also it doesn't bulge out as much as that. But as I said in the beginning, it of course depends on the yarn you are using. But this definitely is a good alternative to the most common way. And then we look at 2 more ways, which are sort of hybrids of these. I'll pull these out first. The next one is something that I actually started using as quite a small girl, because I was doing quite a lot of lace crochet, like doilies, and there you often have to put 3 together, and I didn't like the basic way. So you start the same way again, and you start a second one as well. But now, instead of leaving it, what you do at this stage, you pull through 3 of the loops. In other words, decreasing 1. So that only makes a small difference. And then after that, you again make the 3rd one. And now all 3 together. Again, I'll make another stitch so we see how it goes. So that just makes it slightly smaller, not quite as bulky as the very first one we did. And the 4th one is again like a hybrid. You always start the same way. First one always goes like that. And then you do a second one also like that, leaving the last stage undone. But the last one, you only take 1 loop there and then pull through. So that is similar to this here one we did in the beginning of this row, but the stitches settle a little bit differently because of the way we did it. Now that we have seen them all, how do you decide which one to use? First of all, it's important to remember that you can use any of these and your stitch count is not affected. But like we saw in the tutorial, the more stitches you have there, the bulkier it becomes and the more it shows. So that's really what you should be thinking of. And the chunkier or thicker your yarn is, the more likely it is to show. So with chunky yarn, I would not use the first one we looked at, the most common way. And especially if you are using something like twine for crochet or t-shirt yarn or even just heavy cotton, then I would definitely not use the first one. The bulkier the yarn, the more it shows. But especially if you're using fairly fine wool, it sort of molds itself into a very nice fabric. So in that it matters less which way you do it. And again, in doilies, like for instance lace coming to a tip in a doily, I would not use the most common way because all the other ones make a nicer shape. So this video again is one of my series about fine-tuning your crochet. You can see all the other ones in here, and all of these fine-tuning tips are tips where there's no right or wrong, but it's more that the more experienced you are in crochet, the more you want to have choices of doing things in different ways. So I hope that this here tip will also be useful to you. Until next time.